Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It is Alex from Chargers Wire back to do another prospect profile after a couple weeks off. We did that. Steven and I did that video talking about the Chargers potentially trading up, which I know was a scenario that a lot of you had thoughts on, considering that we traded up for a corner and everything. But um, been taking it a little bit easy on the profiles recently, just prepping for that video and then also getting all of my other draft stuff ready. But I figured I would hop on here and get another guy profiled for you guys because today's episode is one that I am very excited about. But before we get to that, obviously the promotional stuff, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. Steven and Tyler have some big stuff coming down the pipeline, and I know that you guys are going to want to be there for that. There's also going to be a few more videos from me before the draft. We have a roundtable coming up with me and Gavino from Chargers Wire and Steven and Tyler talking about everything related to the draft. It's going to be really fun. There's a lot of good stuff going on, especially for the next month or so here as we get into crunch time before the draft. So make sure you're subscribed. Also, if you like me specifically, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson, the same way that it's spelled on the screen there. Um, I am mostly focusing on pro day results and stuff right now, maintaining that spreadsheet. And so that's been taking up a lot of my time, but it's also a very rewarding time of year for me, and I love doing that sort of stuff. So if you guys are nerds about testing data and stuff like that, go ahead and shoot me a follow. And then once the draft concludes here, I will mostly transition back to talking about the Chargers and talking about guys that they drafted, and maybe we'll do some more specific content as it relates to that. Today, we are going to talk about a guy who I think is a great fit for the Chargers. And we're finally going to talk about a defensive player, which we have not done since the Tank Dell and Trey Dean episode, I think, which I think was the first one that we did. So we are going to talk defense again, which seems to be a theme of my recent appearances on the channel. But what can you do? This is a guy who I found out doing research on him. Went to high school 12 minutes away from SoFi Stadium, so very local guy. And I dropped some hints about who it was going to be on the trade up video that I did with Steven. I told you guys it's a guy that went to school in California, guy from California, FCS level. Some of you got it, and that is Marte Mapu, who is a linebacker, but also kind of a safety from Sacramento State. Um, so, some background on Mapu. Like I said, he is a Sacramento State Hornet. He's a sixth year senior, so he graduated high school in 2017, which makes him a 23-year-old rookie. He will be 24 on November 8th of this year. So a little bit older for a rookie, but nothing super crazy. It's November of '99, so not anything. Uh, we're not talking about Hendon Hooker here, but it is going to be a little bit older as a rookie. At the Senior Bowl, he measured 6'2" and 5/8 inches, 217 pounds. So kind of a tweener frame, and we will talk about that plenty as we get into his traits and things. He was an unranked recruit out of Hawthorne High School, which is in Hawthorne, which is a LA suburb, is the best way that I can describe it. And like I said, I put 15 minutes on there because I didn't want to be super specific. But when I looked it up on Google Maps, Hawthorne High School to SoFi Stadium is a 12-minute drive as of about 8:45 the night of March 30th. So with traffic, it might be 15 to 20 minutes. But point is, like, he went to high school in the shadow of what ended up being SoFi Stadium. Obviously, SoFi was not completed when he was in high school because he's been in college for 6 years, but grew up around the construction site of SoFi, if you want to call it that. While he was in high school, he played quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker, corner, safety. So pretty much everything that you could think of, which is more common than you'd think for a lot of these guys coming out of high school. A lot of guys, they're the best athlete at their school, and so their high school coaches say, like, hey, just get on the field and we'll figure out, we'll put you wherever, and hopefully we'll win games. The difference is that when Mapu got to college, that versatility continued. He primarily played linebacker and safety in college, but he also did play a little bit of corner, especially early on. But primarily it was linebacker or safety or nickel, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. Safety wise, he has played at three different safety spots. Sac State runs a defense that employs three safeties. It's not a 3-3-5 from what I could tell, but it's base nickel essentially. So he's played uh, deep half, both sides, free and strong safety, and then also kind of that middle of the field safety that usually acts more of like a robber in coverage. And so he's played all three of those. He's excelled at all three of them. This year, he was the Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year and an FCS All American. Those accolades got him an invite to the NFLPA Bowl, which is in Pasadena. And if you're not familiar, the NFLPA Bowl is kind of the third All Star game behind Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl. And then he was so dominant at the NFLPA Bowl that the Senior Bowl called him up and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come to Mobile?" Because we had a guy pull out for injury. So he was in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. He was there the entire week and blew it up the entire week. He was one of the best players there, um, which is not often the case for a guy that gets called up that late. A lot of times, those guys are kind of worn down already by that point because they've already had a full week of practice at a different All Star game, and so they get to Mobile and it's kind of just like not like a happy to be there sort of thing, but it's kind of like they're there and it's a recognition of their accomplishments, but like they're not usually like standing out as one of the best guys in regardless of position at the entire event. And Mapu was doing that, and so that's a big deal, obviously. And we know the Chargers love their Senior Bowl guys, and so something kind of additional to get him on the radar. In his career, so he has been at Sac State for 6 seasons, but he only played in four of them. In 2017, he redshirted the entire season as a true freshman. And then in 2020, most FCS schools did not play at all because of the pandemic. So Mapu has only played in 2018, 19, and then 21 and 22. In 41 career games in those 4 years, he had 165 total tackles. 13 of those were for loss with one sack, and he also had 7 interceptions and 22 pass deflections and one forced fumble. So super productive guy around the ball. We will talk about that in a second, but basically, like if the ball comes near him, it is probably not going to be a completed pass. Um, and then unfortunately, he did tear his pec while he was training for his pro day. Sac State's pro day is actually scheduled to be today. If you're watching this the day it comes out, it's tomorrow for me because today is Thursday and Sac State's pro day is Friday. But he did tear his pec while training for that, so he's not going to test prior to the draft. He tore it pretty recently, so he's not going to be healthy enough to do like an individual workout or anything like that, which is super unfortunate. But such is the way that it goes sometimes with these guys. Um, Strengths wise, versatility is the big thing. Like we talked about, he's got experience at corner, safety, nickel, linebacker, everywhere. And there's tape to back up him being effective at every single one of those. You can go back and you can watch 2022 tape, and he's, you know, pretty interchangeable between safety, linebacker, nickel, and looks like the Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year because he is. You can go to his Senior Bowl tape and watch him play strictly linebacker that entire week, and you can see like the translatable traits there. So someone who not only is versatile but has proven that he is effective in every single one of those spots, instead of just being versatile for the sake of saying that they're versatile. Tackling, I did not see him miss a single tackle the entire time that I was studying him, which is rare. It's especially rare for a guy who is playing linebacker at 217 pounds. That is exceptionally light for a linebacker. Um, I know Steven has been talking about Nick Neiman the last day or so on the timeline, and Neiman weighed 234 coming out of Iowa, and that is already like sub 50th percentile weight at linebacker according to RAS, and Mapu's 217. which if I had to guess is probably like 15, 20th percentile or something. But despite that, if he hits you, you are done moving. Um, Not only are you not going to break that tackle, but you are not even going to like be able to spin out of it at all and get a couple extra yards. You're not going to be able to drive through it at all and like, pick up an extra yard or two falling forward. Like, no, like he is taking you in the direction that he's going. And that's your problem. Um, He's a super solid lower body tackler too, where a lot of these guys, you see them kind of ankle tackle, and it's pretty weak attempts, and it's just kind of like flailing out there, just hoping that you can trip a guy up. And with Mapu, it's like no, like if he gets a hold of you at all, like you are going down. Obviously, for the Chargers, that is probably music to their ears, given the tackling problems on the defense last year. And then in coverage, Mapu's experience as a DB really shines through. He's super proficient as both a spot dropper from like a box linebacker position, but also in man. Sacramento State played him in man, especially in the slot, a ton in 2022, at least in the games that I watched. And obviously FCS level competition, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but for the most part, like he has the movement ability to stick with slot receivers in man-to-man coverage, which is huge. Because if you look at the Chargers defense last season, they had corners that could do that, but when you got into zone coverage and you had guys like Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquil patrolling the middle of the field in zone, slot receivers were pretty easily able to outmaneuver those guys. And with Mapu, that is not an issue because he has the change of direction ability and he has the experience as a DB and as a high school wide receiver that like he knows what the route is, he knows what's coming, and he is able to run that route with a guy and make a play on the ball. He's also super quick closing speed wise with the ball in the air. I cannot tell you the number of times that I watched the opposing team throw a screen on the outside and Mapu diagnoses it immediately, slips every block, and like makes a play in the backfield, like tackles the guy for a loss of 3 yards. Um, you know, or if he's closer to the line of scrimmage, gets there fast enough that he breaks up the pass entirely. Um, you cannot throw screens if he's on the field. You just can't do it. He is simply there every time. And a lot of the reason that he is because he has that range. So if you want to play him at linebacker, I think he has sideline to sideline upside. I don't think you're ever going to play him at Mike because he's too small. But if you want to play him as an outside linebacker and then have him pursue backside of plays, like he can still get there. And if you want to play him at safety, like he has the range to play a deep half. And run with guys up the field, up the seam, and be able to do that, and has no issue doing either one of those things, which is rare in a player. Usually when you get these kind of like hybrid linebacker safety types, it's like, well, he's a little bit better at this as a linebacker, but a little bit better at that as a safety. And with Mapu, it's kind of like, no, like you could just play him at either one and he would be good. It would be fine. Um, there are some weaknesses to his game, obviously. There are weaknesses to every player. Um, Most of these are have to do with his frame. I don't want to double count him on the frame thing. Like I said at the top, he is a little bit of a tweener. 217 pounds for a guy that's going to play linebacker full time is too light for the NFL, to put it simply. If he's going to play safety, that's fine. But that's also, I think, not necessarily the best use of his skill set if you're just going to play him purely at safety all the time. So there's a little bit of a question there. And part of that question has to do with the way that he sheds blocks. So Mapu is very clearly more athletically gifted than other players on the field. And that has to do a lot with the level of competition that he played. Obviously, FCS level, it makes it a little bit harder to gauge sometimes how those players are going to translate because most of the time, those guys that are NFL caliber look like the best athletes on the field. Um, a lot of times you'll hear with smaller school players, especially scouting them for the NFL, it's if this guy does not pop off the screen and immediately you can recognize him as the best player, um, he is probably not someone that should be like on your radar as a draftable prospect. Brandon Thorne is really good about this. I saw a tweet from him a few months ago where he was watching a University of Minnesota Duluth guard named Brent Lang, who was at the Shrine Bowl. And the way that he does it is don't look up anything about the guy before you start watching the tape. So like he didn't know what jersey number he was. He didn't know what number, what he looked like. He didn't know what position he played on the O line. He just knew he was a guy on the field somewhere. And he said, okay, you have 15 plays or 10 or 15 plays or something. If I cannot pick you out in 10 or 15 plays and realize like, oh, that's you, then I'm moving on because I don't need to be here. With Mapu, you can definitely tell which one he is very quickly. Um, but also, uh, that level of competition thing where like you can pick out who he is immediately also plays against him in some ways because it's like, well, if you're the best athlete on the field, then you don't necessarily always have to play with the greatest technique and the greatest fundamentals and all that sort of thing. Not that he doesn't, but when it comes to block shedding, there's a lot of running around blocks. There's a lot of slipping past blocks. There's a lot of offensive linemen in FCS college football more so than FBS college football, and definitely more so than the NFL. Are very large men that cannot run very fast or change direction at all. And so if you are asking a guard or a tackle or someone to block Marte Mapu, you end up having them run like 3 yards forward, and then Mapu just kind of runs around them and then ends up behind them and tackles the guy that you're trying to give the ball to. Will that work in the NFL? Maybe. Maybe he's that good of an athlete. There are certainly players that are that good of an athlete that they can do that in the NFL as well. But there's not a ton of examples of him stacking a guy and shedding a block and, like doing the dirty work like in like a strict run fit environment. And I think that's the main reason why you would be hesitant about playing him at linebacker full time. It's not to say that he can't do it. I haven't seen him do it, and I have concerns about him doing it because he only weighs 217 pounds. Um, but he certainly could be able to. The thing is with him is that if you have no examples of him being able to do it, are you going to be comfortable, especially with the Chargers, where you have Eric Kendricks entrenched as a starter and you have Kenneth Murray, I guess, entrenched as a starter? Like, are you comfortable with Mapu potentially taking over eventually and developing that block shedding skill? Or are you going to say, okay, this is an overhang player. This is our, Derwin James money backer backup. This is our, big nickel that we bring in on rundowns, like, and try to get him in space where he doesn't have to actively like shed a block. Um, and then again, not to double count the frame thing, but pass rush wise, he was not asked to do it a ton because of how proficient he is in coverage. And the games that I watched, at least, they had him playing nickel almost exclusively in a lot of packages, and so there's not a lot of nickel blitzes in Sac State's defense that I saw. Um, so again, it's not so much that he can't do it as it is I didn't see him do it. And kind of the same thing. I have concerns about his ability to do it just because he's 217 pounds. He doesn't stack and shed blocks. If you want him to blitz, up the A gap or something, then like he's going to have to shed a block at some point. He can't just run around someone in the A gap. That's not how that works. Um, I do think he's going to be a little bit more of a point and shoot blitzer. What I mean by that is I'm stealing this term from Steven, who used it to describe Israel Abanikanda, the running back from Pitt, who is a point and shoot running back. And what Steven means by that is if you open the hole for him and tell him where to go, he's great. If you make him do it on his own, it is not as great. And I think that that's the same thing, but defensively for Mapu is if you open a lane for him and say like, "Hey, you see this giant hole? Run through that really fast and then hit the guy that has the ball." He can do that. Easy. If you say, "Hey, here's a guy in front of you. chain a pass rush plan together and, get past him, I don't know that he's going to be able to do that consistently. Um, is that a problem? Maybe, maybe not. Again, it depends if you want to play him at linebacker more so, or if you want to play him at safety. Obviously, you look at it as someone that would potentially be replacing Drew Tranquil, even though the Chargers have already signed a replacement for Drew Tranquil. It's Eric Kendricks, yada yada yada. But Tranquil is the guy that left. Um, or even like you look at a guy replacing Troy Reader for 2023. Those are guys who are kind of able to do both of those things. And I think that right now Mapu is a much better coverage player than he is a pass rusher. Um, the injury is interesting from a timing perspective. I mean, I put it on weaknesses. It's not really a weakness per se. I wouldn't say that Mapu is injury prone. Certainly, he's played, like I said, 41 games in 4 seasons of actual playing time. So more than 10 games a season. Um, he has, to my knowledge, never missed extended time for an injury. But tearing your pec in mid-March, right before training for a pro day, is just about the worst time that you can do that if you are a draft prospect. Because now it means that, uh, especially if you're not a combine invite like Mapu wasn't, because now it means that teams will not have testing data on you. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean that teams have no data on you. Obviously, there is a whole host of data that NFL teams have access to that the public does not, which is also why I think the public is going to be much lower on him than the NFL is, which we will talk about in a second. Um, but having no testing data at all does uh, muddy the picture a little bit in terms of his NFL profile. It does make it a little bit harder to project in terms of like, is this a guy that you can play at safety full time? Because you can see it on tape, but again, with the FCS level of competition, it's a little bit harder to say, okay, yes, this is a guy that could definitely play safety in the NFL. Okay, yes, this is a guy that can definitely play linebacker in the NFL. And a lot of teams with these kind of versatile tweener type guys, they want to know where you can stick them full time, right? We see this all the time with like Isaiah Simmons on the Cardinals is a perfect example. Where coming out of Clemson, it was like just put this guy on the field and let him chase after the football and he will be great. And he didn't slip as far as some people thought he might slip, but then the Cardinals picked him up and you can kind of tell that the Cardinals defensive scheme doesn't really know what to do with him. And so he's kind of playing linebacker, and then they moved him to safety, and then they moved him back to linebacker, and they're kind of like still trying to figure out where he fits full time. And it's hindered his development a ton in the NFL. And so you look at a guy like Mapu, who now has this injury clouding his pre-draft process, and that projection gets even harder to make. And selling that to a defensive coach and saying like, "Hey, like we're just trying to accumulate talent," like that's all well and good, but the defensive coach is going to come back and say like, "Where am I going to play him? Like, what position does he play?" And if you don't have an answer to that, then I don't think that you're necessarily going to be interested in Marte Mapu. So overall, I gave Mapu a 6.02, which is a mid fifth round grade. That is one of the higher grades on him that I have seen anywhere. Um, I am very confident in this grade though, because I have talked to a few people, the few people that I know that would know such things, um, that say like, yeah, he's going to be drafted. He's going to be drafted higher than people think he's going to be drafted, and everyone is, a lot of people are going to say like, who is this? Some kid from Sac State. I don't know any NFL players from Sacramento State, which is fair. But I think you could see there's a little bit of steam starting to pick up. There was definitely a ton of steam after the Senior Bowl because he showed up. No one knew who he was. He blew up every running back in existence at the Senior Bowl on day one and day two, or actually, sorry, just on day two. Um, and, just like completely floored everyone. Everyone was like, who is this kid? We need to learn everything about him. And then, like, you go and interview him after Senior Bowl practice, and you can tell he's just mad. Like, he was mad the whole time. People were asking him, what's it like coming here from a small school and everything, and you could tell he was getting a little bit annoyed. He's kind of playing with that chip on his shoulder um, that whole time. And uh, I think NFL teams are going to like that. NFL teams are going to like that, and that's a factor that plays more into draft profiles than I think the public accounts for sometimes. And so I am very confident that he's going to be a midday 3 pick. I do think that there's a chance that he falls into like the 6th round because of the pec injury. Um, but I think if he had stayed healthy and he had tested, that we'd be talking about like a 4th or 5th round player. Um, that's how confident I am in his ability and his I personally I would probably play him at safety. I would say I would play him at safety. I did grade him as a linebacker. I think that he's going to end up playing outside linebacker and probably pack on, 15 or 20 pounds. Um, I think that I would probably play him at safety. The beautiful thing about the Chargers is that he can play both for Brandon Staley because we already have a guy that plays both, and his name is Derwin James. And so if you're the Chargers, you look at Marte Mapu and you say, okay, we can either play this guy next to Derwin, um, or next to Derwin with another safety on the field or with a nickel on the field or something, and kind of have them play interchangeable roles. And this is a couple years down the line, to be clear. Once Mapu has developed a little bit, I don't think you want to do this right away and put this much on his plate. But in a couple years, if he develops like the way that hopefully he does to reach his ceiling as an NFL player, you could probably play him interchangeably with Derwin James, and have a two safety set where you have Derwin and Mapu both on the field, and it's like, okay, one of these guys is going to come down in the box and uh, hit the hell out of you if you run the ball, and the other guy's going to drop into coverage and be able to hang with your tight end or your slot receiver or even your outside receiver, if you want to play that way. Um, and you don't know which one it's going to be. You don't know who's going to do what, and that adds a lot of element of surprise. That adds a lot of versatility. That adds a lot of everything that Brandon Staley's defense wants to do. That is a big, big deal for the Chargers, I think. You can also just say, like, listen, Mapu is going to be our backup money backer behind Derwin James. I think that they're probably looking for an upgrade at that spot. Given the injury history of Mark Webb at this point, I think that you're probably looking at guys who can fill that role as potential Chargers fits in this draft. I think that Mapu is a great one for that. Um, and obviously, if you're a day 3 pick and you're going to play linebacker or DB in the Chargers organization, you need to have special teams ability. And Mapu played special teams all 4 years that he was on the field at Sac State. Even while he's winning Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year, like it's like we saw with Drew Tranquil on punt return last year, where Tranquil would have a third down sack and then he'd stay on the field for for punt coverage, and he'd be running down there, hitting the hell out of people, trying to open up lanes for DeAndre Carter. It's the same thing. Mapu is on kickoff. He's on kickoff return. He's on block units. He has a blocked kick in his Sac State career. Like, he has played every unit of special teams that you could possibly ask for. He's excelled at every single one of them. I have no reason to believe that he won't excel at any of them in the NFL. And so that alone is going to get him a spot on an NFL team, because he's going to be a gunner or a punt protector or a block unit guy or a kickoff unit guy right away. And then you can figure out where he fits on defense later. For the Chargers, I think that fit is easier than some other teams just because of the versatility and the difference in packages and stuff that the Chargers run. But I think that regardless of where he goes, he's going to end up being a guy that we look at 2, 3, 4 years from now and say, like, wow, he was a 5th rounder or a 6th rounder. Like, how did we let that happen? That's insane. And I don't say that about uh, players very often. I am a known player hater, for lack of a better term. But I love Marte Mapu. He's a local guy. I think he's a great fit for the Chargers. And I think he's a great fit draft capital wise for the Chargers, because if you want him to play linebacker, Brandon Staley, I don't think, wants to draft a linebacker before day 3 starts, because of the de-emphasis that his scheme puts on the linebacker position. And if you want to play him at safety, there's already a lot of DBs on the Chargers. You probably can't convince the team to take a safety until day 3 either, unless it's Brian Branch or something. Um, so I think he's a great fit all around for the Chargers. I hope that he's a Charger because I think he's a great player. I think he's a great guy. I am a big fan of him, and I know a lot of other people in the space are too. And so hopefully this gives you a little bit more information on him because I think this is probably the most unknown guy that I've covered so far. And these are my favorite types of guys to cover is guys that the public may not be as caught up on as some of the people in the media sphere or in the league sphere that I talk to every now and then. And with all the local ties and everything, I figured it was a perfect episode to come back to and do. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I've talked for plenty long enough at this point. So hopefully you've enjoyed almost 30 minutes of me rambling about an FCS linebacker. If you've watched any of the other videos, you know that I do this every time, anytime a small school guy or a late round guy or anything like that pops up. So I will cut it off there and let you guys get back to the rest of your day. But before I do, obviously subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. Like I said, I'm mostly focusing on pro day results and stuff, but I'll have the occasional draft piece and Charger specific stuff come out leading up to the draft. And then obviously our draft coverage at Chargers Wire is going to pick up a ton as we get closer and closer. And then we have that roundtable with Tyler, Steven, Gavino, and I set up for I think next week sometime. So you guys definitely want to tune in for that. Anyway, hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Take care.